Namaskar. Today, in this short video, I shall introduce you to periodical essay. Periodical essay that was there in 18th century. But before 18th century and various periodicals, there was a strong tradition that involved various notable essayists and their notable contributions. In this regard, as far as 16th and 17th century literature is concerned, we have various authors, prose writers contributing significantly for the cause of essay. Though it is a noted fact that 16th and 17th century were primarily received as the centuries for the creation of dramatic performances and poems. Yet, there are certain prose writers which must not be given a miss. Who can forget Francis Bacon, the Renaissance figure who came out with his essays? Ben Jonson, who has been received, hailed a dramatist in classical tradition, has the credit to write a prose piece, Discoveries. We have Robert Burton and his Anatomy of Melancholy, Thomas Dekker, Thomas Fuller. We have John Selden, table talk writer, Thomas Overbury, characters, Sir Thomas Browne, very important one, notable for his Religio Medici, Vulgar Errors, and Urn Burial. We have Abraham Cowley and his Of Myself, John Dryden, Essay of Dramatic Poesy and Preface to the Fables, and Sir William Temple of Ancient and Modern Learning and of Gardening. With this small information, let us try to understand periodical essay as we come to 18th century. Periodical essays were the typical product of 18th century. And this 18th century and its relationship with periodical essay is so close that they're almost taken synonymous to one another, to each other. So if one talks about periodical essay, it means one is talking about 18th century. And if one is talking about 18th century, that 18th century will be thoroughly incomplete without periodical essays. This 18th century has various other important significant nomenclatures such as the neoclassical age. The neoclassical age refers to neo, that means a keen, and classical. And the classical here refers to the Roman literature, especially that was there flourished and achieved new zenith of success in the regime of Augustus Caesar. So, on that line of thought, the 18th century British literature was labeled as neoclassical. 18th century is also held as the age of reason, as there were several scientific inventions, and one could see the development of scientific temperament, scientific outlook, scientific inquiry. This periodical essay took its birth, matured, flourished, and died in the 18th century itself. This is what I was just talking about, the mutual relationship, the mutual interdependency, the mutual interconnectedness, the mutual reciprocation. The term periodical essay was first used by George Coleman the Elder and Bunnell Thornton in the magazine The Convisor. At this juncture, it is very much important for all of us to know, what does periodical mean? The periodical or the periodicals refer to the process of publication of journals and magazines over a period of time that could be daily, weekly, quarterly, or even monthly. Due to this very nature, they were hailed as periodical essays. When you talk about periodical essays, the natural question, the first question that comes to our mind is, what were the major reasons for the emergence of periodicals in 18th century? We have several reasons behind that, and I will try to give some of them. And for this, as the first reason, I would like you to take back to 17th century in the year 1660, when Royal Society was established. The Royal Society of London was established to promote scientific inquiry and scientific temperament. And this scientific inquiry and scientific temperament was done on the basis of a specific kind of language that was refined prose. Refined prose, clear prose, lucid prose, minusing the language from all the vagaries, crudities, and even that are those poetic elements, bombastic elements, flowery elements. So making language more practical to refer to the reality, scientific reality. This paved the way for the emergence of new kind of prose, as 18th century is also known as the age of prose, and that is best reflected in periodical essays. By 18th century, there one could see a marked deterioration as far as dramatic performances were concerned. As we all know, in 16th, 17th century, in the wake of Renaissance, English literature did produce notable dramatists forming their own canon. Shakespeare, Johnson, Webster, and before that, university wits, Oxbridge dramatists, Jacobean dramatists, and so many of them. In the end of 17th century and in the beginning of 18th century, there was the rise of a new kind of drama, which I will discuss later, comedy of manners, that was not accepted. It was to elite class, rich class, urban class, but it was not all about that. It was not acceptable to a new emerging class, that is middle class. So the middle class, which primarily consisted of the members of trading communities, or those who were the part of commerce, economic affairs, industries, laborers and workers, they didn't have much time to go to theater, to spend the time for dramatic performances. So the deterioration in drama, the fall of drama, paved the way for the rise of prose, periodical essay. The rise of literacy is another important reason for its emergence. This literacy was there in the new emergent class that is known to us as middle class. So middle class was learning how to read and how to write. So when one learns how to read, one wants to read different things, different topics, amusing, serious, grave, entertaining, moral preaching, several sorts of writing. And this was fulfilled by these periodicals and essays. And this is significantly conjoined by the introduction of printing press in England, London. So printing press made the publication easier. And once publication is easier, there are several publication houses, several magazines, several journals. So all these things are important and immediate regions for the emergence of periodicals and essays. The relationship between periodicals and middle class is another important point. And it would be no exaggeration at all in saying that periodical essays were written by middle class, of middle class, and for middle class in the line as we define democracy. Famous periodicals, so already we have set the tone, and one could easily imagine the numbers of periodicals publishing in the 18th century. So the most important notable periodicals of that century are, first of all, Daniel Defoe's A Review. Then we have The Tatler by Sir Richard Steele, which was started on April 12th, 1709, and it came to an end on January 2, 1711. And for this magazine, the Addison, Jonathan Swift, and Congreve contributed immensely and significantly. The editor was named Isaac Bickerstaff. Then we have Joseph Addison and his famous The Spectator, which came on March 1, 1711, and it ran up to December 6, 1712. Apart from these, we have so many of them as listed here. So we have the Rambler, the Bee, the Register, the London Magazine, the London Chronicle, and so many others. What were the aims and objectives of these periodical essays? And the answer to this question is deceptively simple. The periodical essays addressed current and relevant topics. They talked about, they essays wrote about current, relevant, and significant topics, including politics. Politics, because by 18th century we could see monarchy merely not so instrumental as it was once upon a time. So we have the political parties, Whig and Tory. So often the writers were the part of these political parties. So if one is the part of Whig, he or she will write about Tories, criticizing, ridiculing, mocking, and vice versa. Tory will write about Whig in that way. So we have these essays directed towards religion, religious beliefs, religious practices, fashion, homemaking, practical life, gossip, as well as these periodicals didn't fail to give enough dose of morality, values, principles, and ethics. Why? Simply because of their, one can talk about several regions, but I would like you to take back and again talk about comedy of manners, which arose primarily out of the influences of French culture. So the French culture in comedy of manners simply displayed corruption, moral corruption, ethical corruption, immorality, sexual frivolity, sexual licentiousness, hypocrisy, maneuvering, manipulations, trickery, and what not. Men after women, women after men. And this was not the part of glorious British theatre. So it was to be ridiculed, to be not to be endorsed, to be not to be accepted. And that's why we have Jeremy Collier and an important pamphlet which came out in the 1698 entitled A Short View of the Immorality and Profaneness of English Stage. Of the English stage. This is very important. And these periodicals simply satirized, mocked, ridiculed, made fun of the vagaries, the vulgarities, which were brought to London society, especially through, especially from France and through comedy of manners. They made their literary pieces didactic in nature. Didacticism refers to a modulation, a moral upliftment, and that is there in periodical essays. Richard Steele, a very noted periodical essayist, writes something very significantly. And he writes that, being one of the most important essayists, he writes, the general purpose of the whole, that is, periodical essay, has been to recommend, look at the words carefully, and you would know the answer well. What? Truth, innocence, honor, and virtue, which were put into question or certain brackets with comedy of manners. So he says that to recommend truth, innocence, honor, and virtue, as the chief ornaments of life, to ridicule folly and affectation, foolish behavior, gestures, affectation, hypocrisy. But at the same time, it aimed not to expose misfortunes, which is God given, nature given, and over which human beings have no control at all. Not to expose misfortune and imperfections. Nobody's perfect, nobody's absolute, which are natural and unavoidable. In this regard, how can we give amiss to the observations made by John Gay, very famous for his Beggar's Opera? And he says that it is incredible to conceive the effect his writings, of course, Steele's writings, I'm taking it in general remark, have had on the town. How many thousand follies they have either quite banished or given a very great check to. How much countenance they have added to virtue and religion, and how entirely they have convinced our fops and young fellows of the value and advantages of learning. And this is from his famous writing, The Present State of Wit, John Gay. We have Joseph Addison, who is very much famous for his humor, for his repartee, witty statements. He too talks about morality, imparting values, imparting ethics, good way of life, but that is not in a serious and grave manner. That's why he says to temper wit with morality, witty, comic approach, humorous, to temper wit with morality and enliven morality with wit, to make it simple, and simple things straight away go into the heart and mind and soul. Addison's Addison's writings and his essays can be taken as a continuous attempt to uphold the basic life giving, life nourishing, life sustaining domestic virtues and purity of moral conduct. Through his essays, he talked about the need of the time to cultivate a civilized social responsibility, social behavior, religious behavior, as well as political behavior. Values, morals, and ethics, they are no more to be found in the libraries, in the books of philosophy, strong, healthy, thick books. Instead, these, or they in fact, they have come out of the closet of the big libraries They have come to the public domain, public sphere, and they are now being discussed, debated, questioned, talked about. In 18th century for this, there were several coffee houses. Such was the power of periodical essays. When you talk about the key features of periodical essay, the first and foremost is the brevity, as they're very short, maximum 2 pages, not more than that. And it was but necessary because, as already I have talked about, how there was the emerging class, middle class, trade community, laborers and workers in the industries. So they didn't have much time. They had little time. So, in that little time, what could they read? And yes, the best was periodical essay. These periodicals were very popular among women, especially of middle class. The fair sex, as Addison and Steele say, call, refer. Women. As in this regard, we have W.H. Hudson and his observation, and he says that, in particular, they address themselves directly to women. They did their best to draw them into the currents of larger intellectual life. So, women who were spending most of the times in the household activities, and whenever they got time, what could they do? And one of the things they could do to read these periodicals, as these periodicals provided them everything they needed, right from moralities to gossips, with proper amusement, proper recreation, and proper entertainment. These periodicals and essays gave voice to industrious workers who were involved in the business, in trade, in commerce. This class was a new class, budding class, emerging class. So it was given proper importance, proper respect, proper place, proper space in these periodicals. And in one of the essays which is described to us, the Spectator Club, we have one from this community as well. DJ says primarily involved and primarily aimed to bring about a kind of social reformation which was in the line of enlightenment. 18th century is also known as the age of enlightenment. Dare to know, to go beyond established norms. to know the things which are not known. Enlightenment. And yes, of course, these periodicals helped in clearing off the dust from the minds of ordinary, common, middle class citizens of Britain, London. We have already talked about 18th century as an age of prose. Dr. Samuel Johnson talks about this prose and he refers to this as the Attic prose. And this Attic prose is characterized by familiar but not coarse, rough. It's familiar, day-to-day conversational style, no issue. But it's not coarse, it's not rough, it's not vague. It's elegant, yet it is not ostentatious. There is no bombastic use of language. There is no flowery description. It's all prose, real and practical prose. And this prose is good for the composition of an essay, though it lacked the vigor, the vitality, the energy, and the depth when one talks about the language of Shakespeare or the language of Spencer and Sidney, the Elizabethan writers. So, comparatively, the Attic prose didn't have that vigor, vitality, energy, and depth. It didn't have the warmth and the emotional touch, emotional fervor. But yes, undoubtedly, it was best suited for the composition of an essay because it was intellectually strong. I'm quite sure that this small attempt must have exposed you to the world of periodical essays and essayists. It would simply enable you, if not so far, I'm quite sure that it would enable you to form a basic understanding of periodical essay. Thank you so much.